And we are coming to you now with breaking news. Former President Jimmy Carter has died at the age of 100. The Carter Center has confirmed. Though he served only one term in office, he went on to a distinguished second act of humanitarian work, and he lived long enough to become the oldest former president in U.S. history. Carter died peacefully Sunday at his home in Plains, Georgia, surrounded by family, the Carter Center said in a statement. And we are going to go now to Robert Costa with a look back at his life. Hi, Robert.
Good evening. Good to be with you. All words and thoughts this evening with the Carter family and to the country to have the passing of an American president who has lived a long life, 100 years, has lived the length of a century, and it was a life full with a century's worth of events. To think about tonight, his rural upbringing in Plains, Georgia, a place I have visited and reported on, growing up on a small farm, going to a tiny school, then going to the Naval Academy, becoming a submarine officer, moving back to Plains, Georgia to take over the family farm, and then starting this improbable bid through Georgia politics, through many ups and downs, ultimately becoming governor of Georgia in 1970 and carving out the idea in America of a new South, free from segregation, that was going to embrace business, a new modern way of thinking when it came to social values and political values, and ultimately winning the White House in 1976, beginning that race as a total outsider, to the point where so many people, when they heard of Jimmy Carter, they said, Jimmy who? Jimmy who? And Carter, of course, as we all know from history, embraced that Jimmy who mantra and made it part of his campaign in 1976.
And you've spent time, Robert, covering his home, Plains. Can you talk to us about the importance of his roots there?
Well, one of the first things that strikes you when you go to Plains, Georgia, is this really a town? It's so small, it almost feels like a neighborhood. And that's reflective of how President Carter was raised. He was raised on a farm, and the school where he went to high school is now a museum, and you can go spend some time in that high school and think about Carter's life, studying hard, working on the farm. And it's a hot place, southern Georgia. It's not an easy place to be raised. His family was in the peanut business. It wasn't just the kind of peanuts you eat. A lot of it was peanuts in the shelling business to use with livestock and to use on different farms. And he never thought of himself as someone who was just going to be confined to the Deep South. He read about the world in school as a young boy, and he thought about big dreams ahead for him and for the country. And he had this steeliness to him. When he ran for president in 1976, many people said Jimmy Carter had this big grin, and they said the grin should win. That was part of that 1976 campaign. But as someone who has covered President Carter, met him over the years, what you take away from so much of his life is this core steeliness to his character, this toughness, this grit to get through his childhood, to be a leader in the Navy, to be a leader in Georgia, ultimately to be a leader of this country and a leader in his post-presidency. Let us not forget this long and amazing life was punctuated by many decades as a former president who didn't just retreat to Plains, Georgia and lick his wounds about defeat, but he engaged with the world, won the Nobel Peace Prize, thought about peace and about how to bring health to people across the world.
And Robert, early in his career, Carter spoke up in defense of civil rights and desegregation. Can you talk a bit about that? How big of a deal?
It was a very big deal. In fact, if you look back at Time magazine in 1971, they were covering Jimmy Carter being the new governor of Georgia, giving his inaugural address in Atlanta, Georgia. And he said the time for segregation in the South is over. And this made people in Atlanta and in Georgia go, what's he talking about? This is the South. We're not going to be moving in such a fast pace towards civil rights, towards an opening up of the economy and the country in that sense when it comes to human rights and civil rights. But Carter was determined that he had a mandate after winning in 1970 to change how Georgia did business. And this really caught the eye of the country. Major journalists like Hunter S. Thompson from Rolling Stone and many, many others started to come down to Georgia and say, who is this guy? What's he trying to do in Georgia? Because Georgia was a sleepy state and Carter was a total unknown. But his determination, to make Georgia something different, to make it part of modern America, a place where business could grow, where black Americans would have equal opportunity to white Americans to start a business. This lay the foundation for Carter to be a political star. And by the 1972 convention, he was already being talked about in a small way as a potential running mate for George McGovern. And there's a famous moment in the Jimmy Carter story in 1972. He's sitting around at the convention with his aides like Hamilton, Jordan, and Jody Powell. And he says, "I've just met all the big people in American politics. They're not that impressive. We can beat these people. We can win." And he decided back in even 1972 to think about the presidency in 1976. And that started this long journey to the White House from around 1972, 1973 to his election in 1976.
And Robert, let's talk more about 1976. Carter appeared to come from nowhere. How did a total outsider win the White House?
Well, first, Jimmy Carter had to get through with the Washington establishment. You had so many people who looked at the race in 1976 and they thought they had a much better chance than this guy from Georgia named Jimmy Carter. Jimmy who? He wasn't a threat. But Carter was able to win the nomination by reimagining what it took to be president and how to win a nomination. In brief, we've all covered the Iowa caucuses if you're a political journalist in the last 50 years. But 50 years ago, nearly 50 years ago in 1976, the Iowa caucuses were not the Iowa caucuses as we think about them today. Jimmy Carter put a lot of effort. He called it the Peanut Brigade. People from Georgia went up to Iowa, and they spent time trying to sow the ground for Carter politically, to get some attention and energy for the Carter campaign. And ultimately, Jimmy Carter didn't win the Iowa caucuses in 1976, but he came second place to kind of undecided. And this catapulted him to national attention. Carter was clever even then. In 1976, when the Iowa caucuses happened, you know where Jimmy Carter was that night? Not in Iowa. He was in New York because he wanted to make sure he got on television.
And his presidential legacy is complicated. What about the view of him over time? How has that shifted?
Well, Carter's elected in 76, takes office in January 77, and Washington initially looks at him as an outsider. And he had a complicated personality. He wasn't a glad-hander. He wasn't someone like Richard Nixon, who had all this experience in Washington. So some people really put a wall up to Carter, and Carter put a wall up to others. And he's acknowledged this in his own memoirs and interviews over the years. He didn't build at times the personal relationship with a lot of the member of Congress that he really needed to get his agenda through. And so he was stymied from time to time. And he grew frustrated not only with Washington, but with the country. He famously gave that speech that's referred to as the malaise speech, where he really lamented that the country was moving in a negative direction. And this set the tone for the Carter presidency in the eyes of many of his critics. Someone who was unhappy with the country was unhappy with him. Long lines for gas, the Iran hostage crisis dominated so much of the final 2 years of his presidency. But at the same time, very ambitious on domestic policy, saw himself as a true liberal, a progressive, started the Department of Energy and Education, and on foreign policy remains one of the most ambitious presidents of our time, working with Zbigniew Brzezinski. He was able to think about peace in the Middle East and to broker an agreement called the Camp David Accords between the Israeli leadership and the Palestinian leadership that remains one of the significant pieces of foreign policy deal-making to this day.
Well, Robert, thank you so much for your insight and your reporting. Robert Costa, appreciate you so much.